Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Pivotal Change. We've got a fun, full-packed episode for you, and we're going to be talking with a very special guest tonight, as well as going through some very good material that I'm hoping will help you make that change necessary to find your success. On the opening segment of tonight's episode, we're going to be talking very specifically about teams, and that will be a theme along with communication and operational efficiencies throughout the rest of the episode. So as I always encourage you to do, take notes. You can record or come back and replay this episode as much as you need to because I want this to be something functional for you. So what I like to do is I like to go around and help coach people. In my CS Business Consulting company, we try to get leaders to develop themselves and to help grow teams because I haven't found anyone yet that truly believes that individual effort is better than teamwork. So in doing that, we go into something that we literally talk about as the team approach. So I'm going to be going through a series of slides for you on tonight's show, and we're going to have some quotes, we're going to have some examples, and learn about things to talk about. So one of the first things I want to talk about is I just want to tell you about a quote that I'm very familiar with. So there's this quote that I've heard, and it's called, the quote goes like this: I want to be more efficient and get the job done faster. And that quote is from literally everyone that I talk to. Okay, that's who quotes that one. And when I do that, I have to try to help people understand what efficiency is and what effectiveness is. And so moving along, I try to go into a little bit of an explanation that I'm going to go with to you tonight on the difference between efficient versus effective. And so if we're going to jump to this conversation right here, efficiency really relates to how you perform a task or a job or even like a movement and how much energy it takes, how much resources that it consumes. Efficiency is the amount of wasted effort or wasted resources are reduced to their lowest amount, like not a lot of effort, not a lot of waste. On the other hand, effectiveness is a different term. Effectiveness is the ability to achieve the desired outcome, the ability to achieve what you set out to accomplish. Being effective means the intended goal was check the box, done, and that does not care about the amount of effort and resources. So effectiveness, you can expend a massive amount of time, energy, and resource and be highly effective, but very inefficient. So when you combine the two, you'll see the chart that just flashed up on the screen. And we call this the amplified opportunity model. So if you can have efficiencies and then you ultimately combine it with effectiveness, the ability to get the job done, you have created what you want: low resources and accomplishment. But then you multiply this times teams. That's how you truly get your amplified opportunity. You can work on your own efficiencies and your own ability to be effective and accomplish your mission or your goals. But when you put more people into work and you get them all gathered around a common vision, those teams exponentially grow your ability to be both efficient and effective. So that's what's really fun about this. So what we do is we work everybody through a process, and we go on to the next slide, which says how to determine your needs. So when we're talking to people, you have to actually sit down with your teams, with your peers, your supervisors, and your subordinates, and you have to use your staff in this process. And most people have never dedicated the time to do this with their staff. So we want to sit here and dedicate just a little bit of time to explain what's on the screen. You got to have a really comprehensive list of everything that's involved in getting the job done A to Z, from the first contact all the way to finished product out the door, all the way to billing and invoicing and things like that. And the responsibilities all along the way. And sometimes you'll start to notice that a lot of work or a lot of type of work falls in just one or two people's laps. And when you get this huge comprehensive list broken out, you got to start adding on responsibilities that you realize nobody has. Or you got to start identifying duplications and funnels, choke points in your workflow. And then you have to compare this entire list to the mission of your company, the vision that you have of yourself in the future, and the current list of job responsibilities. Is this list even like, are we doing this task and it doesn't even line up with our mission and it doesn't help us achieve our vision? Well, then you may need to pivot and really make a change there. And then your desired workflow, that perfect vision of how your workflow would play out, and then the overall company workflow if you're broken up into teams and divisions and departments and regions and all that kind of stuff. So boil that into big picture as we move on. So when we move on, you want to assemble these lists in a certain order. So looking at the next slide here, we're going to break down just a real quick way to look at these lists in the next order. We want to take them in chronological order, literally start at the beginning. Where does the entire process begin? Whether that's with the gathering of raw materials, whether that's a sales process, cold calls, or it's referrals, or if the process begins just online with a stranger that we're never going to meet. Break down and assemble your list in the right order. So let's click to the next slide and we'll look at how to do that. So I don't want to spend too much time right here, but you do want to assign initials next to everybody on this master list. And then you also want to break out the list and compare it to the time it takes to get each little task and each little item done, and how complex is that? Does that take a highly skilled person or an expert that can only have industry knowledge to get this done? Or can this be done by anybody all the way down to, the brand new intern that just walked off the street with the company? If you can break down the time and complexity times the chronological order, you are going to really draw out. And you may have a huge list with a lot of redundancies, and that's okay, because that's what we're looking to eliminate. So I want you to do that with the next mindset, the next image on the next slide in mind. So I want you to think about my background as a SWAT team operator and SWAT team leader. If we're moving forward, and if you'll click to the next slide, you will see a perfect example of what it is to have a squad mentality, this fire team mentality. This is a picture of me during a training exercise with some of my buddies, and we are a high-performing team. If you were to examine this picture, you would see all types of gear, all types of equipment, all types of tools necessary to get a whole variety of jobs done in the tactical world. On the same token, people are doing different roles. You have two people looking left and right, two people focused forward on the direction you're going, the mission, the threat, whatever it may be, and they're also holding shields and protecting the team. It's hard to see in the dark picture because it's obviously a photo to kind of look cool, but we're wearing gear on our back, pry bars, crowbars, less lethal, tasers, all kinds of things. And at any given point in time, the assigned person is going to know what they need to do and deploy it. If one person were to run down this hallway looking for an unknown threat, they would have obstacles, they would have open doorways, shady areas, and all kinds of stuff. At every turn, every step of the way, they would be in danger. But a team can cover all of those angles all at once. So if your team is now able to cover all of the angles, you can build a system that covers that entire list that we've been talking about and start assigning the roles and the people and the skills and the tasks to get the overall job done. What this might need you to do is take a look at this next slide. You might now have to think outside the box just a little bit and start shifting and creating. That means shifting the work and possibly creating new tasks or even new roles in your industry. We discovered several years ago that we needed a lot more administrative help. We only had like 2 administrative helpers in our firm, and all of the people operating that were supposed to be getting the high value work done were spending a lot of time making phone calls and emails and scheduling appointments and just printing stuff. And so we shifted the work, created new roles, and really helped ourselves out. And that prevented us from doing what you see in this very next slide. In this very next slide, you see a common problem in businesses all over the country and in multiple industries. If you'll click to the next slide, you can see that we have silos. Silos get formed everywhere, and unfortunately, those are the bad side of teams. Everybody's doing, hey, this is our area of expertise, this is what we're supposed to be doing, our division, our department, whatever it may be, and they don't like to share and help and trade work back and forth. Well, I did my job, well, you just do your job, or that's not my job, I'm not going to do it, somebody else needs to take care of it, versus you can exist in your silo and have your primary job and your primary task, but you need to have open doors, open windows, and open communication, because we know at any given point in time, the job may just pivot or change or somehow shake us up. And we've got to be able to come out of our silos, help each other out, and then we can return right back to doing our primary role. But relationships inside of your teams goes inside with the 7 principles of relationship you might have heard me talk about before, but you don't want to be the type of silo that doesn't branch out, only stays in their lane, and ultimately really breaks down the cog on the wheel for the future of your firm's growth and development. You can only grow if you have open silos. So the next thing I want to talk about, flipping forward here on the next slide, is how to do team makeup. And I'm just going to speak from the real world. What you're going to see is that we break our teams in, generally speaking, 4 people. Sometimes we have 5, sometimes we have 3, but 4 is our ideal model. And we'll have a tax and advisory lead for us at the accounting firm. That just means you're going to probably answer all questions and work product related to advising them on their situation or getting taxes and tax notices done. An accounting and bookkeeping lead at our organization would be working on reconciliations, and they would be working on payrolls and sales tax and use taxes and all of those different tax accounts that recur regularly throughout the year. The administrative assistant is going to give your team a big hug, right? They're going to say, hey, I'm going to keep you all working on your job, and or it's going to be the foundation and the basis for everybody's going to stand on their shoulders to get their scheduling, to get their documents organized, to reach out and annoy the clients for the new pieces of information that we need, the stuff that we don't have, to get these quick questions answered from them. And if they need stuff from us, they're going to give out tax returns so that they can get a loan from the bank and things like that. That is a big time suck on the tax lead and the bookkeeping lead, and the now newly created administrative role can handle that. And then we have a junior role, a person that's learning, they're new, they're maybe a first year or two employee, and they're just going to do high repetition, data entry, learn everything that they can. And this is what it looks like. If you'll click to the next slide, it executes like this. I use the shape of a pyramid, of course, to be clever and match the company logo, but everything starts with the advisory. We normally take people who say, hey, can you help me in a situation, and can you do my tax return? So your tax lead is not the most important person, but leads the way. And then everybody supports each other in a team model, and the admin ultimately takes that role to the extreme. Clicking to the next slide, you'll see how this plays out on the executive level. And the executive level has our partner team, our operations officer, our tax manager, and our admin. And then on the senior level, this is how the teams work and stacked up with each other. The senior team helps deal with the most complex problems and train the staff level and the junior level teams. Then the staff and junior level teams work hand in hand to get each other to that final goal. So looking on, the best way to start on the team model is look at this quote on the next slide. A very famous guy, Walt Disney, said, the way to get started is to quit talking and to begin doing. So I believe wholeheartedly, if you quit talking and you begin doing and implementing a team model with all of this chain of operations, you're going to find an incredible doorway to success. So we're going to talk more about some of these efficiencies, the operational efficiencies, and the teamwork with our upcoming guests. So stay tuned after this break on Pivotal Change. Welcome back from the break, everyone, to Pivotal Change. I'm once again your host, Ryan Conn, and I have a very special guest for this segment, the one, the only, my mother, Cindy Conn. And she is very special, not just because she is basically the reason I am who I am in combination with my father, but she has a very fun career working for and with and assisting executives and operations and efficiency, and has a whole lot to lend to entrepreneurs, to business leaders, to managers, to executives. And we're going to be picking her brain about a lot of those things today, about, talking about team models. Today is one thing we've been talking about. And the other thing is about operational efficiencies. And we're going to jump right into some of those things. So Cindy Conn and Mom, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ryan. I appreciate it.
Well, absolutely. And I appreciate you coming on and sharing some of that brain with us, because it's obviously served many people over the years, myself included. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to educate our audience a little bit about what exactly you did and explain kind of the tier and the hierarchy of how you executed your day-to-day operations.
Okay. I was the assistant regional manager for company vehicle operations for the executives at General Motors. I had approximately 100 employees nationwide because we had different regions, the New York region, the California region, the Florida region. So we had to bring those people in together, and each location was just a little bit different. We probably had to take care of about 10,000 vehicles all within a daily business. From the time that the vehicles were ordered until the time that they were assigned and then disposed of at the end of the assignment.
Gotcha. So your job very much was high-level coordination. You had to, from basically the birth of that vehicle all the way to its assignment and the fulfillment of its purpose, the death of that vehicle,
Yes.
You were overseeing those operations with your team.
That is correct. The executives had to evaluate a new GM vehicle every 3 months or 3,000 miles. So we had to track all that timing as well on when either their 3 months was up or the 3,000 miles.
And how many executives roughly at a time were you having to deal with?
Oh, boy, probably 500
Okay, so
nationwide, nationwide.
nationwide. Yep.
Yeah,
So hundreds of executives nationwide, thousands of vehicles. That sounds like you had to have a lot of coordination and organization along with communication. So I want to bring into the communication side of things. How important was various kinds or styles of communication in dealing with not only the peer level, on the regions, but the subordinates, the 100 employees underneath you, and ultimately going up the chain and dealing with the executives who, may have been very great to work with or may have been more opinionated and ego driven than others. Tell me about communication styles and effectiveness.
yeah. Well, communication is number one on everything, whether it's business, marriage, children, whatever the case may be. Communication is number one. And as we know, everybody learns differently, whether it's written, verbal. I'm not going to go through all of that because we know. So you have to be very creative on getting your point across through one another. Because we had to track so many vehicles, we created what was called an operational throughput chart.
Okay.
So every day the group would get together for maybe 30 minutes. It was short, it was sweet. We ran all our reports. We knew exactly where all the statistics were on each of those vehicles when we came into the meeting. And we would sit down and we would look at problem childs or vehicles that got lost or damaged or whatever it was. And the people would raise their hand and say, that's my category. I'll track that one. I'll do this one. And then we would come back the next day or throughout the day and resolve that issue right then and there. But we kind of had 24 hours to resolve that issue and figure out, because the next day we were going to sit down again and find out where all these vehicles were, is what we were going to.
Okay. Gotcha. I like that. So daily meetings, sometimes multiple daily meetings, but a constant open line of communication. And you said something about people raising their hand and jumping in. So there was a lot of team member initiative to say, hey, that's my problem or my wheelhouse, and I'm going to go ahead and jump in and tackle that.
Right.
Tell me how communication affected the ability of people to take the initiative in those categories and then run off and do their work.
Yeah. Well, we had different departments. So if it was a mechanical issue on a vehicle, the garage or the mechanical people were going to be held accountable to find out what was wrong with that vehicle. Why can't we get it into service? So they would raise their hand, resolve the issue. If they needed me to step in because they had to deal with somebody a little bit higher up, then I, of course, would step in and communicate with that individual that might have been a little bit high, more of my level, to sit and talk to them.
Gotcha.
But most of the people would volunteer because they knew that that's what they were accountable for, was that department, and they would do it. And I always made sure with my people, when they were talking to executives, don't try and pull the wool over their eyes. Say what you mean and mean what you say. So if you couldn't get it done, don't say, well, I think the part might come in tomorrow. You got to
Yeah.
tell them the truth right up front. So that was my motto: say what you mean and mean what you say.
I love it. And I think people, that model that you're holding on to is a great one, that if you start with that as the expectation for communication and somebody deviates from that model, you can say, hey, this is what we're all operating off of.
Mhm.
You're hurting the team. You
Right.
said multiple things, and I would love to go dive into, certain things about accountability and stuff like that. But I think I'm going to pivot into just one specific line where you said if somebody needed to talk specifically with me because maybe they were a little higher up or maybe there was some difficulty or some friction involved, give me maybe some example or generalization of what you would have to step into and how would you then communicate when the initiative taking person was not able to get it done or needed
Yeah.
help.
Yeah. Well, when an executive would come in and turn in their old car, get their new vehicle, the
Mhm.
vehicles were in a FIFO system, first in, first out. So the next vehicle that was ready for the keys to hand over, as long as they hadn't evaluated that vehicle yet, that's the vehicle they had to evaluate. So here it is, vacation season. Everybody wants a Suburban. Everybody wants a vehicle that they can use for a vacation. And lo and behold, they're getting a 2-passenger Corvette. And they're like, wait a minute, I got to go out west and take all my family, to this stuff. And I would hand them over and then say, this is the next vehicle. What I recommend is you either go get a pool vehicle because each
Yeah.
facility had a pool vehicle, or find another executive that has a Suburban and swap out with them for 2 weeks.
Oh, okay. So
So those,
there's little relief valves in case somebody has a little bit of a disruption to their life or a special situation and stuff like
right.
that. But not any level of the team could pull or recommend one of those relief valves, like a vehicle swap or something like that. That had to come up through a chain of some type.
Yes, that was usually a recommendation from somebody else. Or if I knew of the person right before him got a Suburban, I would say,
Right.
hey, call John Doe. He just got a Suburban. He might want a Corvette for 2 weeks. Go swap with him. So sometimes I would help them with other people that had the vehicle that they desired.
Okay. Yeah. So I really like that problem solving, that critical thinking, and of course, um, working people to navigate them towards their solutions.
Right.
And what about, if you had somebody that was just really kind of being difficult, wanted to be the exception or break the rules, or thought that they were special in somehow? What was Cindy Kahn's response to that one? How did you ultimately deal with the person that wasn't necessarily getting the
Yeah.
message?
Well, it wasn't necessarily assigning them a vehicle. I'll give you an example where somebody returned one of their
Huh?
evaluated vehicles with them because they were expected to make sure that the vehicle was clean on the outside and vacuumed on the inside. Didn't have to be pristine, but just make sure it was clean. So I had an executive come in. They must have been out four-wheeling the night before and had their dogs in the vehicle. So they came in, my staff went out to inspect the vehicle, make sure it was turned in. They immediately came to my office and said, Cindy, you have got to come out and look at this vehicle.
Mm.
So I went out there with the individual and looked at him and just kind of gave my motherly look and like, you know the rules. You need to go wash the car. There's a car wash right down the road, which is free because you had your GM sticker. So all they had to do was go drive through the car wash and vacuum it
Gotcha.
out. So I just looked at him. And again, I always had that motherly look with my executives. And I would just tell them, you got to take the 15 minutes or take your keys back to one of your staff and have them go wash it and vacuum it out for you. But this is unacceptable. I cannot do your vehicle exchange and give you a new car until the old one's back to where it's supposed to be. So my
Gotcha.
staff wouldn't address those issues. They would just bring the keys into me, and then I would take the executive out there and talk to them in private, not in front of my staff, take them outside by the vehicle. And that's where we'd have the conversation.
Gotcha. So that I like that a lot. I think that's great as a leader that you were able to step in and support your people. Hey, we've identified, we believe this is the case. We believe this is outside of the parameters. Um, but it's also not our place. Like here at the office, constantly somebody might have a question about a bill or want to change in services and stuff like that. And my people are allowed to have the initial discussions of what we offer, what we can and can't do. But when it comes down to like, hey, I want to break on the bill or I want to add services that are substantial, they can't and shouldn't be making that decision on behalf of Wayne and I. They go then and run it up the chain of command, and will come down and help them. And sometimes it's like, hey, I don't want to take this client or this extra work on. This person's very needy and they don't really meet our profile and our culture. Can we say no? And we ultimately, if it's appropriate, we'll listen to them. So I really like that. Let me throw one quick question at you, and we're gonna have to cut to a break here in just a
Okay.
moment, maybe 60 seconds or less.
Mm.
But I want to talk specifically about team cohesion and team culture. I said, what I want to say is, how important is that team cohesion, and to what lengths would you go to preserve that team cohesion?
Well, team cohesion was extremely important to me. So for me personally, I tried to have that personal connection with each of my employees. Um, I would always check in with every employee every day as long as I could, just walk around the shop, back to the garage to ask them, how you doing? Is there anything I need to know to help make your day better today? Tell me where some of the problems were. I wouldn't make them go through their boss and then their boss have to come to me. I
Right.
went to every level of my staff and would periodically ask them, how's it going? What do I need to help you with? What can I do to make your job easier? Besides the garage, I had personal hands-on experience in every one of my employees' position. Because it used to be when I first started out a one-person job and I was the one person. And then it grew
Got
from there.
Well, that's a very good answer. So we're actually going to talk a little bit more about team cohesion and techniques to keeping the team, which you jumped straight into a little bit. So this is a great segue for us to go ahead and hit the pause button. Everyone stay tuned for more Pivotal Change. We're actually going to be right back with my mom, Cindy Conn, after this break. Welcome back from the break to Pivotal Change, and thanks for sticking with us. We're going to continue down this path of talking about team cohesion and talking about communication and how important it is. And we are speaking currently with Cindy Conn. She's a retired assistant manager that helped run a national executive car program for General Motors. And I kind of butchered the order of that title. But the point is, if you've been watching the show, she had incredible levels of organization and communication that she had to execute on a daily basis for hundreds of executives, thousands of vehicles, and 100 or so team members. And so she really does have a little bit of the secret sauce in getting things to make that work out. So Mom, welcome back from break. And I'm just going to go ahead and jump in with kind of a question from where we left off. We talked about the significance, the importance of team cohesion and kind of the efforts that you were making about those visits to the employees. Tell me about when you put the emphasis into this team cohesion and making that personal touch with each person. What did you then see in response? In response from them to you or them to each other? What happened to your team when that became a habit that you instilled?
Well, first of all, I didn't do all of this stuff for their loyalty and respect, but it just ended up becoming a very natural thing because they saw that I genuinely cared about them, not only with the success at work, but also their personal success. And there were a lot of personal behind the scene things that, as a big manager, a lot of times you want to stay away from that stuff, but you could tell that they needed somebody to step in and help them with something. I can give you a quick little story. One of our employees her car broke down. She couldn't get to work. She called, somebody went to pick her up. Her car was stranded on the side of the road. I sent one of my mechanics to go get her car well enough to bring it into the shop, which you cannot do unless you have my approval to it. Got her car in, got it fixed. She was in tears and gratitude, and for the employees to see that I bent the rules, because if something were to happen, I was going to be the one accountable that had to talk to the high ups as to why I brought a personal car in to help this employee. So they saw that I cared, and they saw that I'm there for them, both personally and professionally, if they need me.
I think you're drawing out something that, and I kind of try to stay on top of some national surveys and do a lot of research on the topics. And of course, you look at leadership statistics and the influence and how you gain traction and followers and things like that. And one of the most important things is that leaders create their own lists of what they think is important in leadership, but they also do surveys on followers. And the number one category that people desire in a leader is to know that they genuinely care. So I think you're drawing out something that the audience, whom I often tell to take notes while they watch the show, should be listening, that you need to genuinely care. And I think the precursor statement that you said is that I didn't do it with the intent of gaining some type of, forced respect or glory or anything like that. You did it because you cared, and faking it, honestly, can only go so far. So you do need to be genuine in that category as a leader, which I think that story helps. Yeah.
Well, part of my policy of who I am is you can do what's right according to policy and procedure, but you can also do the right thing, which goes against policy and procedure. And in that particular case, it was the right thing to do for this person.
Yeah. And I would say on the vast majority of times, without having to acknowledge it, usually the right thing and policy go hand in hand, but sometimes there is a deviation between those things. And you have to say, hey, I'm gonna make an exception. This is not going to be the rule for everybody, that we can just do this all the time. But this is a moment of exception, and I think people appreciate that. So kind of moving along in those same type of lines here with that team culture and that stuff there. You had to work with people up and down the organization. You had mentioned that when you started, you were kind of a one-woman shop for decision making, and then things grew as a much more regional than national operation. Tell me about how things change when you're the decision maker on most, if not all things, that you learn to delegate then, and you learn to recruit the decision making, the so-called slap the table and move forward process. Run us through a little bit of that history that you went through.
Yeah. Well, it was definitely a progression, because when you make all the decisions as the one person, and as you start getting staff in, it was very difficult to let go, and get the accountability on the next person, trying to train them, and delegating. I always thought, and people can take this two ways, a manager is a good checker. And not that you don't trust the person. And that's why we did those operational throughput charts. I was just checking, I would be a part of those, checking to make sure everybody is going down the right path on getting these vehicles cycled through. I don't know if there's ever a magic formula on trying to delegate things to other people. I think it's getting the right people in the right positions, and then you can begin to do that. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question on that one or not, but
No, you are. I think you're right. I think there's no magic formula. I think a lot of it comes down to a feel. And I think over time, and you again feel free to disagree, but over time, I think boundaries start to develop, and then you have to make them clear, and that's where things turn into policies or workplace rules. That here's your little 10 commandment rules for the workplace at this organization, right? And those things begin to come to the surface, and I think you probably had those construct themselves over time, and then often you kind of feel yourself boiling up in the workload and decision making process, and realize that you have to offload that to the competent, the right people that you've trained up.
I was always part of the team that created the policies and procedures for company vehicle operations. So, because I was a subject matter expert in my field, there was a very small group of us that would brainstorm, what does the policy need to be? How do we need to change these rules to make it better? But the ultimate decision on the policy and procedures is, yes, I would give valuable input, but it was the big kahuna sitting up in the top of the big office that had to give his blessings. We had to have everything prepared for him, but he was the one that had to give the final blessings. We prepared everything for him, but he's the one who had to put his name on the policy letter.
Yeah. So tell me about preparation and ultimately that final communication. You're trying to sell the big kahuna on
Right.
this change, this policy, this improvement. And of course, he's not down in the weeds. He's not rolling his sleeves up in operations and seeing how this goes. Tell me about the team or even your individual communications with the big kahuna to get things put into play, put into action.
Well, first off, you need to know them, and you need
Mm.
to know what kind of questions they're going to ask you. So you need to have a good relationship with that individual as well, and be prepared to answer potential questions that they're going to have. So prepare for that big meeting. Because if you go in there and you're fumbling, I'm not quite sure, but I'll get you an answer. You're always going to get them an answer. But I just knew my stuff. Like I said, I was a subject matter expert nationwide. People in California would call me. So I had a lot of validity to what I said, because probably, not to be arrogant, probably 99% of the time it was right.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know?
Well, I mean, that's again, you're the person in the trenches, so to speak,
Right.
that can see the enemy. You can see the complications. You can see
Exactly.
the benefits, and the person behind the scenes has to rely on good, credible information. So I
Right.
think there's a lot of people in the audience that are watching that are trying to be like, okay, Cindy, tell me, like, is there any? You said I have to know the person. Like, what did you do to get to know the big Kahuna so that you can then connect and have more influence going up the chain?
Yeah. Well, any of my bosses, I'm always the type of person, I kind of sit back and watch first. I'll kind of watch some of the things that they do. I watch how they handle things. And then if I can integrate myself into that same arena with them, letting you know, oh gosh, I'd really like to learn about this or that and gain their knowledge from them. That's how you just become more and more valuable within an organization, is by watching, looking, listening, and then asking can I take that over for you? That seems to be kind of a burden for you. Let me go ahead and take that extra responsibility away from you. And then, of course, but to me, it's all about observation. What is it that they're doing that I can learn or do better? And then you start establishing that relationship. It kind of goes back to your very first question, communication.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're ultimately doing the same thing as you're showing that big kahuna, that up the chain boss, that hey, I genuinely care about you as a person and want to alleviate your workload so you can work at your highest and best level as well. And if I can say, hey, let me take this for you so you can free up time to do more of what your vision is, I think people are going to find a lot of credibility in you for doing that. And so I think you've really answered a question that most people have is, how do I establish those things? How to get more credible? And I also want to double down on emphasizing something that you said, which again is very statistically proven, is that when you're in a room, a board meeting or a group setting, the person that has the most influence when they speak is the last person to speak.
Mhm.
And so that has been shown a lot. So you're sitting here to look, to listen, to connect, to ask questions, and then you speak, then you give your opinion. Well, now you have all of the information in the room. Where if you raise your hand and speak up front, well, there may be all kinds of little tweaks. Now we have to pivot, and you have to process there on the spot instead of sitting back. And again, I totally get that there are parameters where, like, hey, we show up to a meeting and you're in seat one and you're in seat two, and we always start with seat one. Well, sorry about your luck. You have to speak first. But as so much as it depends on you to be that observer that then gathers the information and can directly address the concerns with as much information as possible. So last question of the day, and we have to run to those dreadful commercial breaks. But if you were just going to give a real quick example, if you're going to say, hey, one person in a position similar to mine, there's one thing you can remind yourself on a daily basis to say in your head or put on your wall as a reminder to keep you pushing in the right direction and successful, what would you tell that person? Or what piece of advice would you give yourself, 10, 15, 20 years ago?
Always learn. You've got to always learn and look for opportunities in the business field to learn new things. Don't be afraid to fall flat on your face. It's a learning opportunity. I've messed up on executives' vehicles before,
Sure.
and when I make that mistake, up here in Michigan, I forgot to add a rear defogger on somebody's vehicle one time. You betcha every single person was going to get a rear window defogger on their vehicle because you have to have those in Michigan. So you've got to learn from your mistakes and move
Yeah.
forward.
I love it. I love that a lot. I think that's a wall hanger people could have. So Mom, from CS Business Consulting and the Now Media Network, and of course, TV show Pivotal Change, I want to first and foremost surprise you and say happy birthday today.
Thank
And thank
you.
you for coming on the show. And you've been absolutely wonderful. And if anybody ever wanted to try to get a hold of you or pick your brain and say, hey, this subject matter expert could help my business, what is a way somebody could get a hold of you?
Well, I would say initially probably through you. I don't know if I would say go through you first and then we'll figure out a way. I don't go
Absolutely.
on emails or social media anymore.
No,
So
you're the in-person type. I get it.
that's
Well, thank you
right.
so much for coming on the show.
Thank
Everyone
you.
else, stay tuned for our final segment of the night. We'll be back with some more fun and some more conversation on Pivotal Change. See you soon.
All righty.
Welcome back to the final segment of the night, and thank you for sticking with us on Pivotal Change. We've had some great conversations tonight. We led off with a discussion on teamwork and the team model and how important it is to share the work with your team, and everybody can amplify the ultimate product by working together as a team. And then we had a great conversation talking about, of course, communication and the importance of team culture and team cohesiveness, and then how to work with different capacities of communication up and down the chain of command and develop and delegate over time. So we've had a lot going on here. And I just want to start leading into a little bit of a conversation that I have with a lot of leaders as I go around the country and I teach. And CS Business Consulting seems to run into the same issue with a lot of people, is that they don't really perceive themselves as the type or the magnitude of leader that they are. And I think anybody that has contact with other humans has to understand that they have influence. If you're a parent, you're very well aware of this. You understand that your children are not only formally learning from you as you teach them to read and write and tie their shoes and ride a bike, but you're also teaching them your values and your culture and your faith and the very important things that are going to carry them throughout their life. But there's lots of times where you discover that you're an accidental leader. You may not think those ears are hearing you from the other room as you say a certain phrase, and then they echo it the next day. And you realize, oh, that person heard me and wants to be like me and echoes and repeats my behavior. You may be in the kitchen making breakfast, not realizing that little eyes are upon you. Then the next morning you come in and see your child attempting to make breakfast just like you did. So one of the reasons I bring that example up is that we are not always aware of our influence. And one of the things that's important is that if you're in any type of management, leadership, ownership type of scenario, or you work for a community organization, or you are a coach or a volunteer, or work at a church, or help out at a church or daycare, whatever it may be, you have eyes on you, you have ears listening, and you do have influence. So I'm going to go ahead at this point and jump into our first slide. Well, I'm not going to kill you with a whole lot of PowerPoints, but I want you to understand that you are a leader. Every single person has influence, and that influence can be either good or bad, and in all human life is both at some point in time. I have been a bad example myself for my subordinates, for my peers, and for my superiors throughout my life. But I hope and pray that I've been much more of a good influence throughout my lifetime as well. And every person as a leader has the ability to lift someone up or push someone down with a look or a glance or a sharp word or some edification and encouragement or some literal physical nature where you're picking somebody up. I think a lot of sports coaches or anybody that's played a sport or helped out with sport understands that a kid may wreck and fall down, whether they're running the race, whether they're trying to dig out a save in a game of volleyball, or they're on a wrestling mat. And sometimes the coaches physically have to pick them up, but a lot of times it's through discipline and it's through encouragement and setting an example. And those are the ways that influential leaders can make an impact as well. You have the ability to increase your influence as well, your ability to lead. And there is something that I'm going to jump into here in a minute after I leave this slide called the sphere of influence. Most people are not looking as leadership as something that is tangible or measurable. They think leadership is just a general character trait that they utilize on accident or because they get put into some type of titled position or role. So I want to talk to you about how most leaders are not aware of their influence, but in fact, they do have something called the sphere of influence. So here we see the sphere of influence has some very purposeful graphics on it. And I want to point out first, the blue graphic, the arrow pointing down, that points to subordinates. When you say leader, most people think, okay, who are you in charge of, or who's following you? Who are your subordinates and the people that you direct? And that is oftentimes very true and the most influential place that we have, because we can actually direct their behavior and actions. But another set of arrows is our peers, our contemporaries. If we're in a group of managers, we have to go have manager meetings once a month or once a week or whatever it is to report about how our teams are doing, our division or our department is doing. And we have influence amongst our peers along the row. So most people don't realize that that's, a conscious effort and it's a recurring enough ability. Back in law enforcement, when I was on the SWAT team, I had a sphere of influence among my peers. So when I was on the SWAT team, I had to sit here and look at my buddy who was equal to me and determine whether or not he and I could make this decision or move forward. So sometimes I had to make decisions even in the moment with my peer level on the SWAT team, those other operators. We had to look at each other, effectively know what to do and determine, hey, this is safe, or even order another person, hey, you move forward over there, I'll move forward over here. And we could have that influence to affect the overall mission. So I think if we're looking at it on this example here, we have to understand, I'm going to go back one slide real quick. And I want to have you guys understand that your peer level influence is very important as well. But then there's another one. There's the influence outside of your organization. So instead of with your subordinates, the blue arrow that's going down, or your peers, the orange arrow that goes side to side, we have the gray arrow jumping outside your organization. Let me give you a example from the realm of the accounting world. See, I don't think that I necessarily influence a lot of people that are not my clients, but I do. And a lot of times my clients go out in the community and they've received a piece of advice from me and they go echo that to somebody in their same industry, or they refer that person to then become my client. Or we have the ability to market or put out newsletters and information packets. And I can definitely market to people outside of my organization, my internal structure, or even my client base. So there's a sphere of influence that affects you outside. And if you're looking at that slide again, that arrow going up is the thinnest arrow because this actually happens the least often, but that is influencing up the chain of command to superiors. So that would be somebody like a sergeant going to the captain or the major or the assistant chief of police and going up the chain saying, hey, boss, there's need for a change. And we need to make this change. And they articulate the reasons why. And the captain was not aware of the issue or maybe nominally aware of the issue and agrees to then make the change down the pipeline. And you have successfully influenced somebody up the chain who is your boss. They can slap the table and make the decisions about your actions and your behavior and your life on the job. And then another one is that from the accounting realm as well, I never think that I can, who is my superior as an accountant? Well, that would be the government entities that I report taxation to. I don't work for them in any capacity. In fact, I work with my clients to help follow the rules to the best benefit of my client. But the thing is, I could potentially respond to a tax notice where the IRS or the state of Kentucky or one of these government entities says, you need to do something, you need to change something, you need to pay us more taxes. And I can then write a letter saying, hey, no, here's an example from the law, or no, here's the realistic nature, or this is an exemption because, and then the IRS or the government entity would accept that answer and be influenced from a lowly accountant or a lowly client of mine compared to the huge umbrella of the IRS. So when we look at this, clicking a little further on the slides, we realize that most of the conversations we have in our sphere of influence absolutely happen on the subordinate to the peer level. So let's just click forward just a little bit. And what we realize is that there are some percentages. If you look, 60% of your organizational communication and influence is at the peer level or below. So you can have pretty straightforward ad hoc conversations with somebody that's a peer or subordinate and influence that person in the moment without very much forethought or planning. You just go and do the work. But if you look back at the sphere and you look at that line running through the screen, that sphere says above, we're doing some of our peer influence and definitely outside of our organization and above, that has to be pre-planned. That upper right corner tells us we have to be pre-planned. And it's highlighted for you to understand that you have to do just like Cindy Conn said. You have to know the person, know the audience. You have to get your facts straight and be as much of an industry expert as you can. So you come to them with answers, and they're not just going to be asking a lot of questions. You've already answered those questions. So if you truly want to influence, like the chief of police in my former profession, I better come with a plan, a map, maybe some written reports, some evidence-based examples of what happens in the past. And then my chief is going to be like, yeah, you've done your homework, you're prepared, this totally makes sense, and he can make the decision. If you're going to do peers on certain levels, you have to pre-plan a presentation with your peers to get that moment across. So I'm going to circle back to my point before I really push into closing out the show today. But if you want to be the best teammate possible, you can move and groove in your system and develop your skill and become a more influential person. There is a tetrahedron that I use to example the mind, body, spirit, and ability or skill of a person. And if you can grow in all of those areas, well, your sphere of influence is contained inside of that. And you can grow your sphere of influence by growing yourself in your physical nature, your mental nature, your spiritual faithfulness nature, and your skill ability nature. And as you grow all of those, you have more influence. But what most people don't realize, as a leader and influence, you really should be growing yourself in all of those areas. If you overemphasize one of them, it becomes a lopsided geometric shape and tilts to one side and ultimately kind of squishes your sphere of influence. So hopefully you can grab that imagery for me as we wrap up the night. But I want to emphasize that working as a teammate, you can pre-plan conversations and be more influential. In trying to convince people up the chain of command, like you heard in conversations tonight, go out, make an agenda, set goals for the meeting, have objectives, have reports, have evidence, and influence those people. And don't be afraid to do that down the chain as well. But as a person who has knowledge and title and position, hopefully genuine care of their people, you're going to make decisions on a much more comfortable in the moment basis. And you're free to act and live in that way. So re-examine this episode tonight. Look at that sphere, apply it to your situation. How much pre-planning are you doing? How much awareness do you have of affecting people outside of your division, outside of your workplace, outside in the community versus up the chain, across to your peers and down the chain? And make sure that you are setting the best example possible. And with that, I want to leave you with this. If you're doing the examination, then I challenge you to go out there and I want you to see the change and be the change. And we'll get with you next time on the TV show, Pivotal Change.
This has been a Now Media Networks feature presentation. All right.